Mr. McLennan.
Would the Prime Minister clarify the government's policy on Europe? The Deputy Prime Minister has said that it offers recombination of sovereignty for more effective partnership. The Chancellor of the Exchequer has said that the EQ could develop into a single currency. Was she surprised that by 11 votes to 1 in Rome, her European colleagues preferred her Cabinet's colleagues' expression of belief to those which she expressed there herself?
Mr. Speaker, we shall cooperate fully as a nation-state with its own parliament with other 11 countries in the European community. With regard to a single currency, it is not our policy to have a single currency imposed upon us, and I believe that meets with the views of Parliament and people. Not our policy to have a single currency imposed. We have made different proposals for a further stage which involve a hard ECU. The Honourable Gentleman is very much aware of those proposals. Mr. Speaker, I believe the traditions and example of this House have gone the world over with admiration. I believe they have served not only this country well, but I believe they have served Europe well when this House kept sitting when the lights of Europe went out.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister take this opportunity today to strongly condemn those Conservatives who have publicly insulted her Deputy Prime Minister by calling him irresponsible and unconstitutional simply for expressing his views on the future of the European community?
People don't need a license from me to express their views on this side of the House. Unlike a previous Labour Prime Minister who indicated that Labour backbenchers and frontbenchers did need a license from him.
But, Mr. Speaker, that certainly doesn't answer the question. On an issue as vital as this, doesn't the Prime Minister owe it to her Deputy Prime Minister to state unequivocally that those who have personally and viciously attacked him do not have her support? Doesn't she owe it to her Deputy to say that he enjoys her full confidence on all matters?
The Deputy Prime Minister, my right honourable friend, the Deputy Prime Minister is too big a man to need a little man like him to stand up.
Goodson Wicks! Order! Mr. Goodson Wicks!
Mr. Speaker, sir.
Order! Order!
Its honourable friend agreed that other European countries hold just as strong views about protection of their own particular national identities, but are more inhibited than my right honourable friend in expressing them.
I totally agree with my honourable friend. I think most people feel rather strongly about their national identities, and when it comes to getting down to detailed discussion, one will see those differences emerge. They do not emerge while we're talking about generalities.
Order! Prime Minister.
I think, Mr. Speaker, it is important that we all fulfil our present commitments before taking on new ones. Clearly, there are some countries in the common market who, in fact, would like to hand over some of their financial affairs to a European Central Bank and divest their parliaments of much of their powers. That is not our view. We do not wish to hand over further powers from this Parliament to other bodies. First, Mr. Speaker, it is our purpose to retain the power and influence of this House and not to denude it of many of the powers. I wonder what the right honourable gentleman's policy is in view of some of the things he said. would he have agreed to a commitment to extend the community's powers to other supplementary sectors of economic integration without having any definition of what they are? Would he? Because you would have thought he would from what he said. One of them was that the Commission wants to extend its powers and competence into the area of health. We said no, we weren't going to agree to those things. And what he says, he sounded as if he would, for the sake of agreeing, for the sake of being little Sir Echo and saying me too. Would he have agreed to extending qualified majority voting within the Council, to delegating implementing powers to the Commission, to a common security policy, all without any attempt to define or limit them? The answer is yes. He hasn't got a clue about the definition of some of the things he is saying, let alone securing a definition of others. Yes, the Commission does want to increase its powers. Yes, it is a non-elected body, and I do not want the Commission to increase its powers against this House. So, of course, we are differing. Of course, the chairman or the president of the Commission, Mr. Delors, said at press conference the other day that he wanted the European Parliament to be the democratic body of the community. He wanted the Commission to be the executive, and he wanted the Council of Ministers to be the Senate. No. 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 Perhaps the Labour Party would give all those things up easily. Perhaps they would agree to a single currency, to total abolition of the pound sterling. Perhaps, being totally incompetent with monetary matters, they'd be only too delighted to hand over the full responsibility, as they did to the IMF, to a central bank. The fact is, they have no competence on money, no competence on the economy, so yes, the right honourable gentleman would be glad to hand it all over. But what is the point in trying to get elected to Parliament only to hand over your sterling and to hand over the powers of this House to Europe? Perhaps the right honourable gentleman will understand his brief a little bit better next time.
Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister realise how welcome it was that we heard in her statement that she has at last been forced to admit that the hard ECU proposal can be a transition mechanism to a single currency? Would she congratulate both her Chancellor and her Foreign Secretary in levering her forward towards reality on that matter? Does she realise that that is good news for Britain? But does she realise how much bad news for Britain it was in her performance at Rome? Does she realise that she has, in a single meeting, isolated this country in Europe, weakened our voice in Europe, divided her cabinet, and betrayed this country's long-term best interests? Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister realise that if she faced a Labour Party which was not equally divided, equally muddled, equally confused on this matter, she would today face a motion of no confidence in her failure at this historic moment? Does she realise, does she realise that for as long as she hangs on to power, so long will Britain be held back from its future? That she no longer speaks for Britain, she speaks for the past.
What rubbish.
Oh dear, Mr. Speaker. It seems as if there must be quite a lot of late parrots in cloud cuckoo land. If the right honourable gentleman can come out with that stuff. Of course, if you have a parallel currency, and people choose to make more and more use of it, it could evolve into a single currency, but that could not be done without a decision coming back to this House, and I believe to the people of this country. I take it that the right honourable gentleman's policy is to abolish the pound sterling, the greatest expression of sovereignty. I think that would be totally and utterly wrong in any event to agree to that now. That is a matter for future generations and future parliaments, and Parliament is supreme, not the right honourable gentleman, the member of the Liberal Party.
Mr. Robin Squire.
The discussions last weekend, would my right honourable friend reconsider in the near future proposals to separate and make independent the Bank of England so that it may buttress our battle in this country against inflation?
Mr. Speaker, mostly when banks are called independent, they are usually answerable either to Parliament, as in the United States, where Mr. Greenspan is answerable to Congress, or they have a number of politicians on their board. I do not believe at the moment the structure that we have in this country would be served well by what my honourable friend is proposing. I think it is far better to increase the amount of democracy rather than to go ahead and reduce it, which I believe would be wrong at this time.
Mr. Norman Tebbit.
Friend not agree that the mark of a single currency is that all other currencies must be extinguished, and not merely extinguished, but that the capacity of other institutions to issue currency has to be extinguished, and that in the case of the United Kingdom would involve this Parliament binding its successors in a way which we have hitherto regarded as unconstitutional.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. This government has no intention of abolishing the pound sterling. If the hard echo evolved into much, much greater use, that would be a decision for future parliaments and future generations. It would be a decision which could only be taken once, and a decision which should not be approached in this atmosphere, but only after the greatest possible consideration. I believe both Parliament and sterling have served our country and the rest of the world very well. I believe we are more stable and more influential with it. I believe it is an expression of sovereignty. This government believes in the pound sterling.
James Molyneux.
Does the Prime Minister recall that in the Europe of 1940, Britain was in a minority of one? Does she further agree that 50 years on, the basic issue is still the same, namely undiluted parliamentary democracy, not imposed diktat?
I totally agree with the right honourable gentleman. There are some things in the community for which there was majority voting when we went in, and we accepted that. There have been more things for the specific objective only of achieving the single European Act. There is an attempt now to get far more passed by majority voting. That means that we would have laws imposed upon us, even though this House, more laws, was flatly against them. We expect our people to obey the law, mainly because it has gone through all the legislative processes in this House, and we should be very slow before we add to any majority competence on the part of the community.
Steve Norris.
Would my right honourable friend accept that there's very wide support in my constituency for the stand that she took on the IGC on economic and monetary union? And would she further accept that that support is not based on the niceties of international economics, but on the clear and firm belief that those who dictate fiscal policy for the United Kingdom should be fully and directly answerable to the electors of the United Kingdom?
I totally agree with my honourable friend. What the Delors report is proposing is that they should be answerable to no one. It is very ironic indeed that at a time when Eastern Europe is striving for greater democracy, the Commission should be striving to extinguish democracy and put more and more power into their own hands or into the hands of non-elected bodies.
Joyce Quinn.
To the Soviet Union, is it not the case that the British government is far more reluctant to step in and give economic assistance than the countries of Germany, France and Italy? Is the Prime Minister not aware both of the political risks within the Soviet Union if we do not respond generously at this time, and also of the long-term risks for British industry if other countries step in and establish the aid and trading relationships with the Soviet Union before we do?
Mr. Speaker, the German banks, the Deutsche Bank, gave a very considerable loan to the Soviet Union of something like the order of 6 billion Deutschmarks. That had all gone within a matter of weeks. It was, in fact, guaranteed by the Federal Republic government. It had all gone within a matter of weeks and was used to repay debts which the Soviet Union owed to German manufacturers. That has gone. It has, if I might say so, done nothing to help the economic situation in the Soviet Union.
To David Owen.
Money on it.
Is it not perfectly clear that what was being attempted at Rome was a bounce, and a bounce that led only one way, and that was to a single federal United States of Europe? And is it not vital that in this House, across party lines, it is possible for a Prime Minister to go and make it clear, if necessary, that Britain is prepared to stand alone, and that we don't relish it. We don't relish it, but that if necessary, if we are faced by the imposition by treaty of an obligation to a single currency and a situation which would prevent the enlargement to Poland, Hungary and Czechoslovakia, Britain would be entitled and right to use the veto.
Mr. Speaker, I totally agree with the right honourable gentleman. That was precisely the stance we took. It is a stance we have taken on many previous occasions. The European monetary system to which we belong, is a system designed for 12 sovereign states in cooperation with one another to come to the exchange rate mechanism. What they're proposing now, an economic and monetary union, is really the back door to a federal Europe, and we totally and utterly reject that. We would have greater economic and monetary cooperation, which can be achieved by keeping our sovereignty.
Mr. Hugh Dykes.
Does not my right honourable friend agree and confirm that her words today mean in effect that she would prefer to withdraw from the Treaty of Rome and the single European Union?
She didn't say that.
No, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend can't really have listened. We would like to have the kind of Europe which we believe in, which is the Europe which we went in to join. If my honourable friend looks back at some of the speeches, we were absolutely assured that we would not, in fact, be giving up sovereignty. That was the basis upon which we went in. May I remind my honourable friend, we agreed, this is on the 24th of May, the Prime Minister, 1971. We agreed in particular, that the identity of national states should be maintained in the framework of the developing community. This means, of course, that though the European Commission has made and will continue to make a valuable contribution, the Council of Ministers should continue to be the forum in which important decisions are taken. This provides clear evidence that joining the community does not entail a loss of national identity or an erosion of essential national sovereignty.
Nigel Spearing.
Despite what the Prime Minister's just said, is it not clear that it's the wish of our partners that there be a loss of national identity as far as currency is concerned? Is it not true that even the hard echo, coupled with fixed exchange rates, would lead inexorably to economic and monetary union? And government, either of bankers, for bankers, by bankers, or a strong political central government which will usher in a new Euro state. If the Prime Minister is now to save Britain as a self-governing nation, hadn't she better make that clear and so galvanise the people of this country, parties and Parliament, to say very politely no
to EMU?
If I believed that, I would do just what the honourable gentleman, the honourable member has said. I don't believe his interpretation is correct. I accept that many in the your economic community would like to have their version of economic and monetary union, which does consist in passing powers away from the national parliaments to a non-elected body, to, in fact, a central board of bankers, and indeed passing powers to a majority voting and more legislative powers to a European Parliament. That is their version. It is not the version that we have accepted. Indeed, the Single European Act defined economic and monetary union as cooperation in economic and monetary policy, and that is all you need, in my view. Now, the hard ECU is a proposal which does not require a central bank, which would make it an inflation-proof currency, and which could be used if people chose to do so. In my view, it would not become widely used throughout the community, but that is a viewpoint. It would not become widely used, possibly most widely used for commercial transactions. But I think many people will continue to prefer their own currency, and therefore I do not believe that what the honourable member fears would happen will in fact happen. I'm pretty certain that most people in this country would prefer to continue to use sterling. If, however, by their choice, I was wrong, then there would come a time when we would have to address the question, but that would not be for us, it would be for future generations of this House.
Terence Higgins.
Honourable friend, take time between now and the conference in December to explain to her European colleagues what any first-year economics student could tell them, namely that the imposition of a single currency as opposed to a common currency would rule out for all time the most effective means of adjusting for national differences in costs and prices, and that in turn would cause widespread unemployment, which would probably exist on a perpetual basis, and very serious financial imbalances.
Yes, I entirely agree with my right honourable friend. It would do just that. It would also mean that there would have to be enormous transfers of money from one country to another. It would cost us a very great deal of money, but it is one reason why some of the poorer countries want it, because they would get those big transfers of money, but we are trying to contest that. It would mean if you have a single currency or a locked currency, the differences come out substantially in unemployment or vast movements of people from one country to another. And I think a lot of people who talk about a single currency have never considered its full implications.
Leighton.
There is no majority in this House for EMU, but is the Prime Minister aware that I attended a conference in Italy last year and an Italian minister spoke to me about EMU, and I said, what if Mrs. Thatcher opposes it? And ungallantly, he laughed out loud. And he said, oh, we've met Mrs. Thatcher many times. She squawks and makes a noise at the beginning, but always comes round and gives way in the end.
Jeffrey said.
Now, what assurances and guarantees can she give this House today that she will not give way on this issue, as she did give way on the Madrid condition about British inflation before she joined the ERM?
That's what they said, Mr. Speaker, when I was negotiating for a better budget deal for Britain. Twice they and the people in the Commission and our people in the Commission, and we had the presidency of the Commission, advised me to give way. They found out different.
Ashley.
Mr. Speaker, a single European currency means loss of control over our monetary policy. Our monetary policy has been an absolute shambles. What is the Prime Minister fussing about?
The monetary policy was at its greatest shambles when inflation under Labour reached 27%.
People!
Mr. Speaker, next Wednesday
the doors of this chamber will be closed to black rod as a symbol of the independence of this House. What will be the effect, can my right honourable friend say, what will be the effect on the independence of this House and the nation which elects it if the power to veto proposals affecting social affairs, environment and taxation were to be removed?
Mr. Speaker, I hope that when the next election comes, people who want to come to this House will come to uphold its powers and its responsibilities and not to denude this House of them. We have surrendered some of them to the community. In my view, we have surrendered enough.
Mr. Ben!
Is the Prime Minister aware that what we're really discussing is not a matter of economic management, but the whole future of the relations between this country and Europe? And that the issue is not best expressed in 19th century patriotic language or in emotive language about what designs on the currency. The question really is this: are the British people, when they vote in a general election, to be able to change the policies of the government that has previously been there? And it is already a fact, as the House knows full well, that whatever government is in power, our agricultural policy is now controlled from Brussels, our trade policy is controlled from Brussels, our industrial policy is controlled from Brussels, and if we go into the EMU, our financial policy will be... It is a democratic and not a nationalistic argument. But may I also say this to the Prime Minister, having been a member of the government that took us in to the EC without consulting the British people, having been a Prime Minister of a government that agreed to the Single European Act without consulting the British people, having now agreed to the ERM without consulting the British people, well, we do not really find it hard to believe that she is really intent on preserving democracy rather than gaining some political advantage from waiving some national argument in the eve of a general election. That is why we do not trust her own judgment on the matter.
Mr. Speaker, I think I would put it just a little bit differently from the right honourable gentleman, although I recognise some of the force of some of the points that he's making. I think when the proposals for, the Delors proposals for EMU came out, the Economic and Monetary Union, it was said immediately by my right honourable friend, the then Chancellor of the Exchequer, that this was not really about monetary policy at all. It was really about a backdoor to a federal Europe. A federal Europe taking many, many democratic powers away from democratically elected bodies to non-elected ones. I believe fervently that that is true, which is why I will have nothing to do with their definition of economic and monetary union. We will continue the cooperation which we have come to establish as nation states. But when when the act was passed, which enabled us to go into Europe, it was passed on second reading by 8 votes. But it was made very clear at that time that we were not going to surrender our national identity. It was a matter of cooperation. And on the face of that, many people went in. But that, I'm afraid, would be quite different if we went for a single currency, a central bank, and their definition of EMU.
Churchill!
Will my right honourable friend tell the House how far she believes that Germany, when the moment comes, will be prepared to see the transfer of its monetary policy from the Bundesbank to a European central bank on which it will have one voice out of 12?
Mr. Speaker, I think it's wrong to think that each of the 12 have similar votes or influence on these matters. I think that there are some in Germany who are backing this scheme, only some, but some, because they know that the dominant voice on any central bank would be the German one, the predominant voice. And of course, if we did not retain our national identities in Europe, the dominant people in Europe would be German. And the way in which to balance out, as we have traditionally done throughout history, to balance out the different views in Europe is by retaining our national identity.
Jonathan Aitken.
May I congratulate my right honourable friend on the valiant stand she has been taking to fight for Britain's economic and parliamentary independence in Europe. And may I ask her to emphasise the point that standing alone from the 11's plan for EMU may bring positive economic benefits to Britain. Would she not agree that the country which has the strongest currency in Europe, one of the highest per capita incomes in Europe, one of the strongest financial services industry in Europe, is economically and politically independent Switzerland? And will she therefore not agree that economic independence is no barrier to economic success?
I totally agree with my honourable friend. Switzerland has a marvellous record, both as far as her currency is concerned and as far as her manufacturing and services are concerned. And we, of course, will continue to do so if other people go for a single currency and we stay outside.
Radice!
The Right Honourable Lady has referred to the 11 other European leaders as living in cloud cuckoo land, but hasn't it occurred to her that she might perhaps be living in cloud cuckoo land if she thinks that the majority of the British people are likely to go along with her short-sighted proposals on economic and monetary union, which are likely to lead Britain into being excluded from Europe's first division?
No, I think that is totally wrong, but I note that the honourable member believes in a single currency regardless of its consequences on this country, regardless of how much we have to transfer, regardless of the enormous consequences for our securities and the many, many consequences which would follow. I do not believe that his view is shared by many of the people, and that we indeed will see. But I think he will note, I think he will find that most people prefer to have the pound sterling and prefer to have our parliament. But if he doesn't wish to have either, why does he want to come here after the next election?
Brown. Would my right honourable friend accept that a single European currency is not a soft but a harsh option, and the introduction of such a single currency without first achieving a single European market and then a single European economy would be an extremely harsh option, and that it would benefit neither the consumer nor the producer fairly, but merely the bureaucrat, and therefore lead us down the trail towards not only a federal Europe, but an undemocratic, bureaucratic federal Europe.
I agree wholly with what my honourable friend has said. When the discussions about the currency and the economic and monetary union get into the finance ministers, they are very much more practical than some of the heads of government are about these matters. And I believe, and I'm sure our colleagues will have heard my right honourable friend the Chancellor say many, many times that there are many of his colleagues who are very worried about any suggestion of a single currency before we have really almost a common economy, or an economy with about similar prosperity. It just wouldn't work. And once you go to a single currency, then all the differences would come out in heavy unemployment and in massive movements of people. Very heavy unemployment. Well, of course, very heavy unemployment. Well, of course, socialist countries like France have much heavier unemployment than we have already. We come out in even heavier unemployment and massive movement of people from where they had previously been living to where the work was.
Cash.
My right honourable friend accept that many people are concerned about the predominance of Germany in the European community, both here and elsewhere in Europe, but that the answer does not lie in federal Europe, because a majority voting system already contains Germany, and to move down the federal route and to go for a central bank would do no more than ensure that that central bank was dominated by the economic realities of the strength of the Deutschmark. And therefore we're far better off making sure that we have a wider Europe in which we have a balance of interests, including people from East, West and Central Europe as a whole.
Mr. Speaker, I'm totally against a federal Europe, and I believe the overwhelming majority of people in this country are against a federal Europe. I think we should not take any steps in that direction, but to uphold cooperation between peoples. Of course, Germany will continue to be a very, very important country in the community, very important indeed. And Chancellor Cole, in fact, is always very European in his approach and very generous in his help to Eastern European countries. I think it is better that we negotiate with Germany as she is now, and we as we are now, and not try to have a kind of United States of Europe. One thing to have United States of America from a newly settled country, quite a different thing with ancient nation states, each with their own tradition.
John D. Taylor.
Mr. Speaker, although the Ulster Unionist Parliamentary Party sits presently on this side of the House, is the Prime Minister aware that we are shocked at the somersault of policy decisions which have taken place within the British Labour Party, who are now prepared to sacrifice the democratic rights of the British people and instead accept economic policies imposed by a bureaucracy based outside this country? Mr. Speaker, sir, the Prime Minister in her statement said that the policy of this government was to oppose a single currency. But I notice he is now qualifying it with a new adjective, an imposed single currency. Has she really shifted her position slightly? And is she now really saying that she is prepared to negotiate an agreed single currency? I think this needs to be clarified.
No, Mr. Speaker, I think if the honourable gentleman looks at the debate, he will find that the debate that we had, he will find that it has been quite clearly spelled out that we have proposed a hard ECU that will be inflation-proofed, that is a parallel or common currency, not a single currency, that it could, by choice, if people used it more, evolve into a single currency, but in fact, before any single currency could come about, it will be a matter for future parliaments and future generations if they themselves wished to abolish a single currency. This government is against a single currency. It is not for us to bind successors in 20 or 30 years' time.
Mr. Hazelhurst.
What evidence does my right honourable friend have that the bulk of industry and business upon whose success our national livelihood depends is in any way reluctant to see the ordered emergence of a single currency as a logical consequence to the completion of a single market?
A single market and a single currency are two totally different things, as a short study of that would reveal. And may I point out that some of the great manufacturing nations, like Japan, like the United States, like Switzerland, they don't have a common currency or single currency with anyone else. They have a single currency of their own, and it does not hinder or affect their manufacturing position, and it doesn't affect our position as the greatest financial centre in Europe, that we're not like the yen but we're sterling, we're not like the dollar but we're sterling. We trade in them all. The truth is, Mr. Speaker, that the leader of the opposition is trying to cover his own embarrassment about Europe. Because judging by their speeches and interventions, many honourable members opposite seem to think that the government are absolutely right on Europe. So do a large number of his party's supporters in the country. They don't want to see Parliament's powers steadily and relentlessly diminished. They don't want to see sterling disappear. They believe in Britain, and they know that there are times when you have to stand up and be counted in order to uphold that belief. I wish to continue this argument. I will give way later. They know there are times when you have to stand up and be counted in order to uphold that belief. Yes, there are some people who genuinely want a federal Europe, and they will be prepared to sacrifice a large part of our parliamentary democracy to get it. They would positively like to hand over our financial affairs and responsibilities to another body, an unelected commission or European Central Bank. Because the fact is, as my right honourable friend, the member for Blaby, immediately recognised when the Delors plan was published, he said, "It is clear that economic and monetary union implies nothing less than European government, the United States of Europe. So said my right honourable friend, and that was very clear. But when the right honourable gentleman and leader of the opposition comes to saying precisely where he stands, he's very obscure. Very obscure. Is he a secret federalist? There's no doubt he desperately yearns for the approval. I wish to finish this sentence. I have given away far more than the right honourable gentleman ever dare give way. And so I am going to go on to finish this argument, and perhaps the honourable member will give me the courtesy of listening. There's no doubt the right honourable gentleman, the leader of the opposition, desperately yearns for the approval of those who are federalists, including the socialist president of the European Commission, who once told the European Parliament that before long 80% of economic decisions would be taken in Brussels rather than by national governments. Yeah. Now, that's not very surprising, because socialism stands for intervention and central control. But the right honourable gentleman has an uncomfortable suspicion that a majority of people don't want a federal Europe. So he's in a dilemma. He likes to set his policies according to the prevailing wind, but he's not quite sure which way it's blowing. So he resorts to his usual tactic. The less he has to say, the more he says it. Is he really going to flannel? The answer is yes, I heard it. Why did he really flannel, as he did on radio last week, when asked about a single currency? And he tried to pretend that you could have it and keep the pound sterling as well. He seems to think the issue can be solved by having the Queen's head on an ecu whose value is determined elsewhere. Doesn't he understand that the essence of a single currency is to deprive governments of the right to issue their own currency? That the value of the single currency would not be determined by this government or parliament, but by a European central bank which would not be accountable to this House.
That's right.
Clearly, Mr. Speaker, the answer is no, he doesn't understand this essential point, which my right honourable friend, the member for Chingford, put so well in the House last week when he pointed out the mark of a single currency is not only that all other currencies must be extinguished, but that the capacity of other institutions to issue currencies must also be extinguished. What I have been discussing and debating here is the single currency which we do not want imposed upon us, but it was not clear from what the right honourable gentleman said in the debate, and then all that flannel on radio, whether he was for it or against it. But we also want to preserve our national currency and the sovereignty of this House of Commons. That, I believe, is what Britain's interests require and what the people of Britain want. And it's by setting out clearly what you believe in that you stand up for Britain's interests, as this government has done over our budget contribution, over agricultural surpluses, over the single market, and most recently over the GATT negotiations, when my right honourable friend, the Minister of Agriculture, has done a superb job at the 7th meeting. And had we behaved as France and Germany had, we should have been accused of being non-communautaire. You don't secure the sort of Europe we want by a policy of always going along with what others propose, simply for fear of being left out. Nor do you secure it by the contortions and convolutions practiced by the party opposite. The truth is, Mr. Speaker, they know our policy is right, but they daren't say so.